I'm Theodosia, 32, and I always believed family meant unconditional support. That illusion shattered on my birthday last year in my family's lavish suburban home, where I'd been living to care for my ailing father. I still remember my stepmother Vivian's smirk as she handed me an envelope. "Happy birthday," she said coldly. Inside wasn't a card, it was an eviction notice giving me 30 days to leave. My step-siblings watched eagerly for my breakdown. Instead, I smiled coldly, already formulating the perfect response they never saw coming. If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated you. I read every comment. The story of how I ended up living in my family home at 32 starts long before that fateful birthday dinner. When I was 12, my mother Lisa died of breast cancer after a 2-year battle that drained our family emotionally, but brought my father Richard and me closer than ever. For 3 years after her death, it was just the two of us in our beautiful colonial-style house that my mother had lovingly restored, a house purchased primarily with her family inheritance. Dad tried his best to fill both parental roles. He'd wake up early to make me breakfast before school, attempt to help with my homework in the evenings, and even suffered through awkward conversations about puberty and boys. We developed Friday night movie traditions and Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. Despite our grief, we were managing to build a new normal together. That all changed when I turned 15 and Dad met Vivian at a charity fundraiser for the hospital where my mother had been treated. Vivian was everything my mother wasn't loud, where Mum had been gentle, flashy, where Mum had been elegant, demanding where Mum had been considerate. But she made my father laugh again, and for that I was initially grateful. 6 months later, they were married in a lavish ceremony that I now realize was primarily funded by my father's savings. With Vivian came her 2 children, Maxwell then 17 and Cassandra 13. From day one there was tension. Our once peaceful home became crowded and chaotic. Maxwell claimed the largest guest bedroom and complained that it wasn't big enough. Cassandra criticized everything from our furniture to the family photos displayed throughout the house. "These pictures are so outdated," she'd say, gesturing to photos of my mother. "We should redecorate, make this place more modern." Within a year, many of those photos had disappeared, replaced by professional portraits of our new family, in which I always seemed to be positioned on the periphery, half hidden behind Maxwell's broad shoulders. Vivian's campaign to isolate me from my father was subtle but relentless. She'd schedule father-daughter activities for Cassandra that conflicted with plans Dad and I had already made. She'd interrupt our conversations, claiming Dad was needed for some urgent matter that inevitably involved her children. She'd suggest that I spend weekends with friends so that Richard can bond with his new children. By the time I left for college, I felt like a guest in what had once been my home. I chose a university 400 miles away, partly for its excellent pre-law program, but mostly to escape the growing toxicity. During those years, I came home less and less frequently. Each visit revealed further erosion of my mother's presence in the house. Her garden neglected her books, donated to make space for Vivian's collection of decorative plates. Her kitchen gadgets replaced with newer, more expensive versions that my father couldn't operate. After law school, I started building my career as a paralegal at a small but respected firm in Boston. I rented a tiny apartment, dated occasionally, but never seriously, and threw myself into work. My visits home dwindled to major holidays and Dad's birthday. Even those brief stays became increasingly uncomfortable, as Vivian would make pointed comments about how I abandoned my father while she stepped up to care for him. Then 3 years ago, everything changed again. Dad called me one evening, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Theo, honey," he said using my childhood nickname, "I need to tell you something." He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The tremors had started subtly, a slight shake in his hand that he'd attributed to too much coffee. But when he began dropping things and experiencing stiffness in his movements, he finally saw a neurologist who confirmed the diagnosis. "It's early stages," he assured me. "They say I could have many good years ahead with the right treatment." What he didn't say, what I learned when I flew home that weekend, was that Vivian was already complaining about the burden of his care. "I'm not a nurse," I overheard her telling a friend on the phone. "We're supposed to be enjoying our retirement, not dealing with this." My father, once a robust, 6-foot-tall construction company owner, looked smaller somehow. The confidence in his movements had been replaced by a cautious deliberation. When he reached for his coffee cup, I noticed the slight tremor in his hand that he tried to hide. That weekend, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I gave notice at my firm, packed up my apartment, and moved back into my childhood home to help care for Dad. My boss, understanding my situation, arranged for me to do occasional remote paralegal work to keep some income flowing, but it wasn't enough to afford my own place nearby. It's temporary, I told myself, just until we get a handle on Dad's care routine. Temporary stretched into permanent as Dad's condition progressed more rapidly than expected. Each morning I would help him dress and prepare his medications. I accompanied him to doctor appointments, taking detailed notes and researching treatment options. I modified our home to make it safer for him, installing grab bars in the bathroom, removing trip hazards, rearranging the kitchen so essential items were easily accessible. Through it all, Vivian contributed almost nothing to his care. She continued her weekly salon appointments, her lunches with friends, her shopping excursions. Maxwell, now 34 and working at a finance firm. Dad's connections had secured for him, visited occasionally, but usually just to ask for money for his latest investment scheme. Cassandra, 30 and between jobs as usual, would sweep in, kiss Dad's cheek, and then complain about her latest boyfriend drama before disappearing again. "You're so lucky Theodosia can do all this," Vivian would tell Dad within my hearing. "It's not like she has a real career or family of her own to worry about." These barbs stung, but I swallowed my pride. This wasn't about Vivian or me, it was about Dad. And as his condition worsened, including cognitive symptoms that left him confused and sometimes unable to recognize Vivian or his stepchildren, I became even more determined to protect him. Vivian began to resent my presence more openly. "Remember that this house is jointly owned by your father and me," she would remind me. "You're here on our charity." I'd bite my tongue, knowing confrontation would only upset Dad. But each night, as I collapsed into bed exhausted from caregiving, I wondered how much longer I could endure this arrangement. As my 32nd birthday approached, I had no expectations of celebration. The previous year, my birthday had passed with only a text message from Vivian saying, "Richard's not feeling well. We'll do cake another time." That another time never came. So when Vivian announced a special family dinner for my birthday, I was surprised but cautiously hopeful. Perhaps 3 years of watching me care tirelessly for my father had finally earned me some respect. Perhaps this was an olive branch, a chance to reset our strained relationship for Dad's sake. How terribly wrong I was. The morning of my 32nd birthday dawned bright and clear. I woke early as usual to help Dad with his morning routine, carefully guiding him through his exercises designed to maintain mobility. His condition had been particularly difficult that week, with increased tremors making even the simplest tasks challenging. "Happy birthday, Theo," he said, his voice slightly slurred, but his eyes clear and loving. From his nightstand drawer, he pulled out a small package wrapped in newspaper, a throwback to my childhood when he'd always wrap presents himself rather than use store-bought paper. "Dad, you remembered," I said, genuinely touched. "Course I did. You're my little girl," he replied, though at 32 I was hardly little anymore. Inside the package was a delicate silver bracelet that I recognized immediately. "Mum's charm bracelet," I whispered, tears springing to my eyes. I had thought it lost years ago during one of Vivian's cleaning sprees. "Found it in the attic," Dad explained. "Was saving it for today." I slipped it onto my wrist, the familiar weight of it comforting. "Thank you, it's perfect." After settling Dad in his favorite chair with his medication and breakfast, I moved through the kitchen, preparing meals for everyone else. Though Vivian never acknowledged it, I had taken over most household duties alongside Dad's care: cooking, cleaning, grocery shopping, bill management. It was exhausting but necessary, as Vivian claimed she was too stressed to handle these tasks. As I whisked eggs for breakfast, Vivian swept into the kitchen in her silk robe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Don't forget we're having dinner at La Maison tonight for your birthday," she said, pouring herself coffee. 7 o'clock. I've arranged for the neighbour's daughter to sit with Richard. I paused mid-whisk. "Dad's not coming," Vivian sighed dramatically. "Theodosia, be reasonable. He can barely hold a fork some days. We can't have him embarrassing us at a nice restaurant." The casual cruelty of her statement made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. "Then I'll stay home with him. We can do dinner another night." "Don't be difficult," she snapped. Richard agreed this is best. Maxwell is coming in from the city and Cassandra is bringing her new boyfriend. It's all arranged. I doubted Dad had agreed to anything more likely. Vivian had made the decision without consulting him, as she often did these days. But I nodded reluctantly, not wanting to create tension that would affect Dad. Throughout the day, I went about my usual routine while wondering about this unexpected dinner. Something felt off about Vivian's sudden interest in celebrating my birthday, but I pushed aside my suspicions. Perhaps this was genuine. Perhaps 3 years of watching me care for her husband had finally softened her heart. For the dinner, I chose a simple navy blue dress that had been a gift from my mother years ago. It was classic and timeless like Mum herself had been. I paired it with her charm bracelet and small pearl earrings that had also been hers. Looking in the mirror, I saw echoes of her in my features, the same heart-shaped face, the same deep brown eyes that Dad always said could see right through people. Before leaving, I checked on Dad one last time. The neighbour's daughter, Emily, was settled in with him, a stack of his favourite classic movies ready to go. "You look beautiful," Dad said, reaching for my hand. "Just like your mother." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, kissing his cheek. "I'll bring you dessert from the restaurant." La Maison was the most expensive restaurant in our small town, the kind of place with white tablecloths, sommeliers, and prices that made you wince. As the host led me to our table, I spotted Vivian Maxwell Cassandra, and a man I assumed was Cassandra's new boyfriend, already seated and sipping cocktails. "Finally," Cassandra muttered as I approached, though I was precisely on time. "Happy birthday, Theodosia," Vivian said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than 3 months of my sporadic paralegal income. Maxwell barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, happy birthday," he mumbled. The boyfriend introduced as Tyler gave me a quick once-over before returning his attention to Cassandra, who was draped over him like a scarf. The dinner began with awkward small talk, Vivian dominating the conversation with stories about her country club friends, Maxwell interjecting with tales of his financial genius that somehow never translated to actual success, Cassandra and Tyler whispering to each other and occasionally giggling while glancing my way. I picked at my appetizer, a salad that cost more than I would typically spend on an entire meal, and tried to maintain a pleasant expression. Whatever Vivian's reason for this dinner, I was determined to be gracious. After the main course, during which I noticed everyone had ordered the most expensive items on the menu, Vivian tapped her glass with a fork to get attention. "We have a special surprise for Theodosia's birthday," she announced, her voice carrying just enough to make nearby diners glance our way. From her designer purse, she extracted an envelope with my name written on it in her flowing script. "This has been a long time coming," she said, sliding it across the table. "Thank you," I said cautiously, picking up the envelope. It felt too light for a card, and I noticed Maxwell and Cassandra exchanging knowing glances. I opened it slowly, pulling out what appeared to be a formal document. As I unfolded it, the legal language immediately caught my eye. After years in law offices, I recognized an eviction notice instantly. 30 days to vacate the premises. I read aloud, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the shock coursing through me. "We need your room," Vivian explained with the false sweetness she had perfected over the years. "Maxwell is moving back home to save money, and he needs a proper home office space." Maxwell smirked. "No hard feelings, Theo. Business needs." "But I'm caring for Dad," I said, still trying to process what was happening. "We've hired a service." Vivian waved dismissively. "It's time you got back to your own life. Richard will be fine." Cassandra leaned forward, her expression a mockery of concern. "You've been putting your life on hold for so long, Theo. This is actually a favour. You need to move on." I stared at them, these people who called themselves family, yet could deliver such cruelty disguised as a birthday gift. 3 years of exhausting caregiving, of putting my father's needs above my own, of tolerating their disrespect and negligence, and this was my reward. For a moment I felt the sting of tears threatening, then something inside me shifted. A cold clarity washed over me as I remembered something important, something they had apparently forgotten. "Excuse me," I said calmly, folding the notice and placing it back in the envelope. "I need to use the restroom." In the elegant bathroom of La Maison, I locked myself in a stall and took several deep breaths. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to a number I had saved months ago but hoped never to use. "It's Theodosia Parker. It's time to move forward with what we discussed. I'll bring the documents tomorrow." The response came quickly. "I've been expecting your call. 10 a.m. work for you?" "Yes, thank you." I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and stared at my reflection. My mother's eyes looked back at me steady and determined. I remembered her words from long ago. "Sometimes, Theo, the kindest people need to find their teeth when pushed too far." It was time to find mine. When I returned to the table, my demeanour had completely changed. I sat down, picked up my water glass, and smiled at my so-called family. "Let's order another round of drinks," I suggested, "to celebrate properly." Vivian looked surprised but signalled the waiter. Once fresh drinks had arrived, I raised my glass in a toast. I want to thank you all for this birthday clarity. I said, my voice steady. It's made some decisions much easier. Decisions, Vivian repeated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Yes, I replied, taking a sip of my drink. Like whether to contest the property transfer that put your name on my mother's house. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Even Maxwell looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion. What are you talking about? Vivian demanded, her voice sharp. 3 months ago, while organising Dad's papers, I found my mother's will. And Dad's original will before your marriage, I explained calmly. Did you know that the house was purchased primarily with my mother's family inheritance, and that her will specified it would pass directly to me upon Dad's death or incapacitation? Cassandra's boyfriend shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden tension. Maxwell's face had drained of colour. That's absurd, Vivian sputtered. Richard added me to the deed when we married. The house is half mine. Yes, he did add you to the deed, I agreed. Under circumstances I've been discussing with an estate attorney. Circumstances that might be considered coercive given the timing and his emotional state following my mother's death. I pulled copies of the documents from my purse documents I had kept as insurance, hoping never to need them. I've been trying to avoid this confrontation out of respect for Dad, I continued. But since you've decided to evict me from my mother's house while I'm caring for my ill father, I no longer see any reason for restraint. Vivian's face had morphed from shock to anger. You ungrateful little... I'm filing for conservatorship of Dad tomorrow, I interrupted. Given his cognitive decline and the evidence I've gathered of financial mismanagement since his diagnosis, I believe the court will find in my favour. Maxwell finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. You can't do that. Actually, I can, I replied. And I will, unless, of course, you'd like to withdraw this eviction notice and reconsider your approach to our family situation. I stood up, gathering my purse and the copy of my mother's will. I'll give you until tomorrow to decide. But just so we're clear, if you force this issue, I won't be the one looking for a new place to live in 30 days. As I walked out of La Maison, leaving them in stunned silence, I felt no triumph, only a sad resolve. This wasn't how family was supposed to be. But sometimes returning the favour means standing up for yourself when no one else will. The week following my birthday dinner was like living in a war zone. I returned home that night to find Dad already asleep, unaware of the battle lines that had been drawn over his care and his home. Emily, our young neighbour, reported that he'd had a good evening watching his favourite John Wayne movies, blissfully ignorant of the family drama unfolding across town. I slept fitfully that night, anticipating the storm that would follow. It arrived with the dawn as Vivian slammed into the house just after 6 a.m. I was already in the kitchen preparing Dad's morning medications when she stormed in, still wearing her clothes from the previous night. "How dare you?" she hissed, keeping her voice low enough not to wake the household. "How dare you threaten me in front of my children?" Taisim. I measured Dad's pills carefully into his daily organizer before responding. "I didn't threaten anyone. I simply stated facts and my intentions based on your actions. This is my house too," she insisted, her carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal the fury beneath. "Richard signed the papers himself." "Did he understand what he was signing?" I asked calmly, finally looking up at her. "Was he of sound mind and body? Was he free from undue influence? These are questions a court might ask." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "We both know the courts favour wives over children when it comes to assets." "Generally, yes," I acknowledged. "But there are exceptions, especially when there's documentation of the original owner's wishes, evidence of coercion, and concerns about elder financial abuse." The word abuse hit her like a physical blow. "I have never abused Richard," she snapped. "Financial abuse doesn't always look like stealing," I replied. "Sometimes it looks like slowly taking control of accounts, like discouraging contact with family members who might notice irregularities, like making major financial decisions without full disclosure or consultation when someone's cognitive abilities are compromised." I closed the pill organizer with a decisive click. "My appointment with the attorney is at 10. You have until then to withdraw the eviction notice." For a moment, Vivian looked uncertain, perhaps realizing for the first time that I wasn't the pushover she had assumed. Then her expression hardened. "You won't win this," she said. "Maxwell is meeting with our family attorney this morning. We'll have a restraining order by afternoon." "On what grounds?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Harassment, emotional distress, whatever it takes," she snapped before storming out of the kitchen. I sighed, already exhausted, though the day had barely begun. Despite my outward calm, I was terrified. Taking legal action against my stepmother wasn't something I had wanted to do. For Dad's sake, I had hoped we could maintain at least a facade of family harmony. But they had forced my hand with that eviction notice, a cruel power play disguised as a birthday gift. By the time Dad awoke, Vivian had retreated to the master bedroom. I helped him through his morning routine, noticing that his tremors were particularly bad, stress often exacerbated his symptoms, and despite our efforts to shield him, he was sensitive to tension in the house. "Everything okay, Theo?" he asked as I helped him button his shirt, a task that had become increasingly difficult for him. "Everything's fine, Dad," I lied, hating the necessity. "Just some birthday blues." His eyes, still sharp despite his physical decline, studied my face. "Your mother always said you had a terrible poker face." I smiled despite myself. She was right about that. "Is Vivian giving you trouble?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. The direct question surprised me. Dad had been increasingly foggy over the past year, with good days and bad days unpredictably interspersed. Today seemed to be a good day in terms of his awareness, though physically he was struggling. "Nothing I can't handle," I assured him, helping him to his feet. He gripped my arm with surprising strength. "The house is yours, Theo. Always has been. Lisa wanted that." My heart stuttered. "You remember that?" He nodded slowly. "Some days I remember everything. Some days it's like looking through fog. But I remember what matters." Before I could respond, a crash from downstairs interrupted us. I helped Dad to his chair and hurried down to investigate. In the living room, Maxwell was going through Dad's desk papers strewn across the floor. When he saw me, he didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. "Where are the property documents, Bidams?" he demanded. "Mom says you're making up stories about ownership." "I'm not obligated to help you find anything," I replied, moving to gather the scattered papers. "And this is Dad's private desk." "It's my mother's house," Maxwell retorted, yanking a folder from my hands, "which makes it partially mine by extension." "That's not how property law works," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "And you're destroying important medical records." Maxwell sneered, continuing to rifle through the desk. "You always think you're so much smarter than everyone else. Little Miss Perfect with her law degree. Paralegal certification," I corrected automatically. "And I never claimed to be perfect." "Whatever," he scoffed. "You won't win this, Theo. Mum's been married to Richard for 17 years. The courts will see this as a family home that you're trying to steal." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging with Maxwell's taunts would only escalate the situation. "Please stop destroying Dad's papers. If you have legal questions, direct them to my attorney." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message from exactly that attorney confirming our appointment. I needed to leave soon to make it on time. "I have to go out for a bit," I told Maxwell. "Dad's nurse will be here in 20 minutes. Please don't disturb him, he's having a rough morning." Maxwell rolled his eyes. "Running away as usual, some caregiver you are." I bit back a sharp retort, knowing it would only give him satisfaction. Instead, I went upstairs to check on Dad once more before leaving. "I need to run an errand," I told him, making sure his emergency call button was within reach. "Barbara will be here soon to help with lunch." Dad nodded, his eyes drifting to the television where a news program was playing. "Be careful, Theo. Vivian was very angry this morning." "I will be," I promised, kissing his forehead. As I headed for the door, Cassandra appeared on the staircase, blocking my path. Unlike Maxwell's overt aggression, Cassandra preferred psychological warfare. "You know what's sad, Theo?" she said, examining her manicured nails. "How desperate you are to hang on to Daddy. It's actually kind of pathetic, 32 years old, and still defining yourself as a daddy's girl." I moved to step around her. "I don't have time for this, Cassandra." "Make time," she snapped, her pleasant facade dropping. "Because you should know that Mom is preparing to have you removed from the property today. For your own good, you might want to start packing." "On what grounds?" I asked for the second time that morning. Cassandra smiled coldly. "Mental health concerns. We're worried about your stability, Theo. The stress of caregiving has clearly taken a toll. You're paranoid, making wild accusations threatening legal action over imagined slights. It's concerning." The strategy was as transparent as it was cruel, painting me as unstable to undermine my credibility with authorities. It might have worked if I hadn't spent years documenting everything related to Dad's care. "That's an interesting approach," I said neutrally. "I'm sure the daily care logs signed by Dad's doctors, the medication management records, and the video documentation of his daily routine that I've maintained for insurance purposes will help clarify who's been providing stable care. Cassandra's smile faltered slightly. What video documentation? I record our daily exercises and cognitive assessment activities, I explained. Dad's neurologist recommended it to track progression patterns. The recordings include dates, times, and often show which family members are present or absent during critical care moments. It wasn't a complete bluff. I had indeed recorded many of Dad's therapy sessions as recommended by his doctors. Those recordings incidentally captured who was involved in his daily care and, more importantly, who wasn't. You're bluffing, Cassandra said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Feel free to test that theory, I replied, finally stepping past her. I have an appointment to keep. As I drove to the attorney's office, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The confrontations with Vivian Maxwell and Cassandra had left me drained, and the day had barely begun. Part of me wanted to give up to find an apartment and leave them to their schemes. But the thought of Dad alone in that house, confused and vulnerable to their manipulation, strengthened my resolve. The attorney's office was in a converted Victorian home in the historic district of our town. Ellen Martinez had come highly recommended by my former law school professor, specifically for elder care and estate disputes. In her mid-50s, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, she projected both competence and compassion. Ms. Parker, she greeted me, ushering me into her office. I've been reviewing the documents you sent over last week. First, let me say I'm sorry you're facing this situation with your family. Thank you, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Things have escalated since we last spoke. I explained the birthday dinner ambush, the eviction notice, and the morning's confrontations. Ellen took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Based on what you've shown me, she said when I finished, you have a strong case for both contesting the property transfer and seeking conservatorship. The timing of your mother's will relative to your father's cognitive decline works in your favour. What about Vivian's claim that she's been married to him for 17 years? Doesn't that give her rights? Ellen nodded thoughtfully. Yes and no. Marriage does create certain property rights, but it doesn't automatically override prior legal arrangements, especially when there's documented intent like your mother's will. The key will be demonstrating that your father's cognitive decline has compromised his ability to make informed decisions about his care and assets. And the eviction notice, I asked, can they really force me out while I'm his primary caregiver? That's actually where they've made a tactical error, Ellen explained. By attempting to remove the primary caregiver without a suitable replacement arrangement, they've demonstrated that their interests may not align with your father's best interests. That strengthens our case for emergency conservatorship. We spent the next hour completing paperwork for both the conservatorship petition and a challenge to the property transfer. Ellen explained that we would first seek temporary conservatorship on an emergency basis given the immediate threat of disruption to Dad's care. We can file these today, she said, gathering the signed documents. Given the circumstances, I believe we can get a hearing scheduled quickly. In the meantime, document everything: medications administered, doctor visits, any attempts to interfere with your father's care routine. What about their threats to have me removed for mental health concerns? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Ellen's expression hardened slightly. A common tactic, unfortunately. But without actual evidence of instability, it's unlikely to succeed. Your consistent documentation of your father's care will work in your favour. I'd also recommend installing cameras in common areas of the home legally in states where single-party consent is sufficient. As I left Ellen's office, I felt simultaneously empowered and exhausted. The legal wheels were now in motion, but I knew the coming days would be increasingly difficult. Vivian and her children would not relinquish control easily. I was right to be concerned. When I arrived home, I found a locksmith at the front door and Vivian supervising as he changed the locks. "What's going on?" I demanded, hurrying from my car. "Just a security update," Vivian replied smoothly. "You'll get your new key when it's ready." The locksmith looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing the tension. "I live here," I told him directly. "This is my father's house and I'm his caregiver. She's changing the locks without his knowledge or consent." The man glanced between us, uncertain. "Ma'am, I'm just doing the job I was hired for." "I understand," I said, pulling out my phone. "But you should know this action may violate elder protection laws as it interferes with a vulnerable adult's established care routine. I'm going to call my attorney now to confirm if you need liability coverage for this type of situation." It was a calculated risk, but it worked. The locksmith gathered his tools quickly. "I think I'll need to confirm the property owner's consent directly," he told Vivian. If the homeowner is present, I'll need to speak with him. This is ridiculous, Vivian snapped. I'm his wife. I have authority. I'm sorry, ma'am, but with disputed occupancy, my company requires direct confirmation from the title holder, the locksmith explained, already backing toward his van. You can call the office to reschedule when that's possible. As he drove away, Vivian turned to me with undisguised hatred. You think you're clever, don't you? I think I'm protecting my father, I replied. Something I'll continue to do despite your efforts. We'll see about that, she said ominously before stalking back into the house. That night, I took the precaution of installing a simple lock on my bedroom door and moving some of Dad's important documents to a small safe I purchased on my way home. I also set up discreet cameras in my room and Dad's room after explaining to him why they were necessary. It's come to this, he asked sadly, watching me position the small camera on his bookshelf. Just temporary, Dad, I assured him. For everyone's protection. He sighed heavily, the weight of family conflict visibly burdening him. I should have been stronger, he murmured. Should have protected you better. I sat beside him on the edge of his bed, taking his trembling hand in mine. You did your best, Dad. Now it's my turn to be strong for both of us. Over the following days, the hostility in the house intensified. Vivian alternated between icy silence and vicious verbal attacks. Maxwell accidentally knocked over and broke several of my belongings, including a ceramic vase my mother had made. Cassandra spread rumors to extended family members that I was unstable and possibly stealing Dad's medications. Through it all, I maintained meticulous records of Dad's care, documented every incident of harassment, and continued working with Ellen to prepare for our upcoming court date. The situation reached a breaking point when I discovered Vivian had been altering Dad's medication schedule without consulting his doctors. I found her in his bathroom, rearranging pills in his organizer. What are you doing? I asked immediately, suspicious. Richard was complaining about side effects, she said dismissively. I'm adjusting his dosage. I moved quickly to examine the organizer, horrified to see she had reduced his Parkinson's medication by half and removed one of his cognitive support medications entirely. These doses are prescribed for a reason, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You can't just change them because you think you know better than his neurologist. Don't be dramatic, Vivian scoffed. Less medication is always better. All these pills are probably making his confusion worse. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the altered medication organizer. I'm calling Dr. Patel right now. This could be dangerous, Vivian. Oh, for heaven's sake, she snapped, trying to grab my phone. You always overreact. I stepped back, already dialing. Dr. Patel's office specifically instructed that any changes to Dad's medication regimen need to be approved. What you're doing could cause a serious setback or worse. When I reported the incident to Ellen, she immediately filed for an emergency hearing. Medication tampering elevates this to a higher level of concern, she explained. The judge needs to know that your father's health is being actively compromised. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following morning. That night, after helping Dad to bed, I sat in my room reviewing our documentation one last time. The evidence was substantial care logs, medical records, financial documentation showing questionable transactions from Dad's accounts, and now photographic evidence of medication tampering. Sleep eluded me as I imagined the coming confrontation. Taking legal action against family members, even toxic ones, felt like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But when I thought of Dad confused and vulnerable, I knew I had no choice. Morning arrived with a strange calm. I helped Dad dress in his best suit, explaining gently that we needed to attend an important meeting. Court, he said, surprising me with his clarity. We're going to court about the house. Yes, I confirmed, adjusting his tie. And about who makes decisions for your care. He nodded slowly. I want you to make those decisions, Theo, not Vivian. She doesn't listen to me anymore. Those words spoken with such simple honesty confirmed what I had suspected. Dad was aware enough to know something was wrong, even if he couldn't always articulate it. That's what we're going to tell the judge. I promised him. Vivian, Maxwell, and Cassandra were already at the courthouse when we arrived, huddled with their attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit who radiated confidence. Ellen met us at the entrance, helping to guide Dad through security and into the courtroom. The hearing was less formal than a full trial, but still intimidating. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed our filings before calling the session to order. This is a hearing for emergency temporary conservatorship in the matter of Richard Parker, she stated. I understand there are also property disputes involved, but today we're focusing solely on Mr. Parker's immediate care needs. Ellen presented our case first methodically outlining Dad's medical condition, my role as his caregiver, and the recent incidents that raised concerns about his safety and well-being under the current arrangement. Most concerning, Your Honour, Ellen concluded, is the unauthorised alteration of Mr. Parker's medication regimen, documented here with photographs and confirmed by his neurologist in this affidavit. Vivian's attorney attempted to paint the situation as a simple family disagreement, blown out of proportion by an overly attached daughter. Mrs. Parker has been married to Richard for 17 years, he argued smoothly. She has every right to make decisions about household matters, including who resides in their home. As for the medication issue, she was simply organising, not altering doses. The judge seemed unimpressed. The photographs and medical affidavit suggest otherwise, Counsellor. When Dad was asked to speak, he surprised everyone with his clarity. Though his voice trembled and he occasionally lost his train of thought, his wishes were unmistakable. I want Theodosia to make decisions, he stated firmly. She takes care of me, knows what I need. The house was her mother's, should be hers. Vivian's face flushed with anger at his words. Her attorney quickly intervened, suggesting Dad's cognitive impairment made his statements unreliable. Mr. Parker's medical records indicate significant cognitive fluctuation, the judge observed. However, his wishes align with the documented care pattern and previous legal arrangements, specifically his late first wife's will regarding the property. After a brief recess to review additional documentation, the judge returned with her decision. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting temporary conservatorship to Theodosia Parker, effective immediately. This arrangement will be reviewed in 90 days, during which time a full evaluation of Mr. Parker's needs and circumstances will be conducted by court-appointed experts. She fixed Vivian with a stern look. Any interference with Mr. Parker's established care routine, including medication management, will be considered a violation of this order. Additionally, no changes to the current living arrangements are permitted during this period. Vivian's attorney began to protest, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. I'm also issuing a temporary stay on any eviction proceedings related to this residence until the property ownership dispute can be properly adjudicated. Given Mr. Parker's condition, maintaining stability in his environment is paramount. As we left the courtroom, I felt no triumph, only relief that Dad would be protected and a deep sadness that it had come to this. Vivian, Maxwell and Cassandra brushed past us without a word, their expressions a mixture of shock and fury. What happens now? I asked Ellen as we helped Dad to the car. We prepare for the full hearing, she replied. This is just the first step, but it's a significant one. The judge clearly recognized the legitimacy of our concerns. That night, after settling Dad into bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, the house eerily quiet. Vivian had not returned after court, presumably staying with Maxwell or Cassandra. For the first time in years, Dad and I were alone in our family home, just as we had been after Mum died before Vivian entered our lives. The temporary peace was shattered by the sound of a key in the door. Vivian swept in her expression cold and controlled. You think you've won? She said without preamble. This isn't about winning, I replied wearily. It's about protecting Dad. She laughed a harsh sound devoid of humour. Please, it's about the house. It's always been about the house. No, Vivian, that's your perspective. For me, it's always been about Dad. She moved closer, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing the air between us. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for this family. 17 years married to a man who never stopped loving his precious first wife. 17 years trying to create a proper family while you judged me from the sidelines. I never judged you until you started mistreating Dad after his diagnosis, I said quietly. All I ever wanted was for him to be happy. Happy, she scoffed. Richard hasn't been truly happy since Lisa died. I was just convenient a replacement to help raise his daughter and manage his household. The bitterness in her voice was so raw it momentarily silenced me. For the first time, I glimpsed the insecurity behind Vivian's polished facade. Is that why you've been taking money from his accounts? I asked the question that had been bothering me for months. She didn't deny it. Insurance, she said flatly, for when he's gone or completely incapacitated. Do you think his pension will be enough to maintain my lifestyle? So this was always transactional for you. I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Everything is transactional, Theodosia. You're just too naive to see it. She straightened her shoulders, regaining her composure. This isn't over. The judge gave you temporary conservatorship, not permanent. And she made no ruling on the property. No, she didn't. I agreed. But that hearing is next week, and I have copies of all the original documents, including the questionable transfer that added your name to the deed. Vivian's expression flickered with momentary uncertainty before hardening again. We'll see what the judge says. In the meantime, I'll be staying with Maxwell. I can't bear to be in the same house with you. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Vivian, for what it's worth, I think Dad did care for you in his way, but no one could replace Mum for him or for me. She paused her back to me. For a moment, I thought she might respond with something genuine. Instead, she simply walked out, closing the door firmly behind her. The property hearing the following week was more contentious than the conservatorship proceeding. Vivian had gathered witnesses, friends who testified about her loving relationship with Dad, financial advisors who claimed the property transfer was standard practice for blended families, even a former colleague of Dad's who suggested my mother had been mentally unstable in her final months. This last testimony hit me like a physical blow. Mum had certainly struggled with depression during her illness, but she had remained clear-headed until the end, carefully planning for Dad's and my future. Ellen counted each witness effectively presenting documentation that told a different story. The original purchase records showing my mother's inheritance as the primary funding source. The clear language in her will designating the property for me upon Dad's death or incapacitation, and perhaps most damning evidence that the property transfer adding Vivian's name had occurred during a period when Dad was on heavy medication following knee surgery. The timing is suspicious at best, fraudulent at worst, Ellen argued. Mr. Parker was taking prescribed opioids for post-surgical pain when these documents were signed. His medication log maintained by his doctor shows he was on doses that would significantly impair judgment and decision-making capacity. My former law school professor, who had agreed to appear as an expert witness, testified about the legal standards for informed consent and the red flags present in this case. The judge, different from the one who had presided over the conservatorship hearing, but equally thorough, examined the evidence carefully. After 2 days of testimony, he rendered his decision. Based on the preponderance of evidence presented, I find that the property transfer adding Vivian Parker's name to the deed of the residence at 1742 Maple Street was executed under questionable circumstances that cast doubt on Richard Parker's capacity to provide informed consent at that time. He shuffled his papers, glancing at Vivian's stormy expression before continuing. Furthermore, the documented intent of Lisa Parker, the original property owner, was clear and legally binding. The attempt to circumvent her will through the subsequent transfer does not meet the standards of proper procedure. The ruling was definitive. The property transfer was invalidated, restoring the house solely to Dad's name, with the provisions of Mum's will once again governing its ultimate disposition. In light of Richard Parker's current medical condition and the recent conservatorship ruling, I am issuing an order that the property be placed in a protected trust with Theodosia Parker as trustee until such time as full ownership transfers according to Lisa Parker's will. Vivian stood abruptly, her face contorted with fury. This is outrageous. 17 years of marriage means nothing. The judge regarded her sternly. Mrs. Parker, you remain entitled to your personal property within the residence and to appropriate spousal support from Mr. Parker's ongoing income. However, you do not have a valid claim to this specific real estate asset based on the documentation presented. As the implications of the ruling sank in, Vivian turned to her attorney in disbelief. Maxwell, who had been sitting behind her, began furiously texting, presumably sharing the bad news with Cassandra, who had not attended. Ellen touched my arm gently. We need to discuss next steps, she whispered, including formal eviction proceedings if necessary. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 weeks after receiving an eviction notice as a cruel birthday gift, I was now in a position to legally require Vivian Maxwell and Cassandra to leave the family home. Dad, who had been dozing lightly during the judge's detailed ruling, stirred and looked at me with surprising clarity. It's done, he asked. Yes, Dad, I confirmed, squeezing his hand. The house is secured, just as Mum wanted. He nodded satisfaction, briefly overcoming the fog that increasingly clouded his expressions. Good girl, Theo. Always knew you had your mother's strength. The formal eviction notice was delivered to Vivian Maxwell and Cassandra the following day. Unlike the abrupt 30-day deadline they had given me, I offered them 60 days to find new accommodations, along with professional moving assistance for their personal belongings. Vivian called immediately after receiving it. "You can't be serious," she hissed through the phone. "After everything I've done for this family." "The courts have made their ruling," I replied calmly. "I'm being more than fair with the timeline and moving support." "We'll contest this," she threatened. "Take it to a higher court." "You're welcome to try," I said, "but the documentation is clear. The house belongs in trust for me as Mum intended." There was a long pause before Vivian spoke again, her voice suddenly calculating. "What if we made a deal? Richard's retirement accounts are substantial. We could come to an arrangement. You keep the house, I get the financial assets." The suggestion confirmed what I had long suspected. Vivian's primary interest had always been financial security, not family bonds. "There is no deal to make," I told her firmly. "Dad's finances are now under court supervision through the conservatorship. His money will be used for his care, not as a bargaining chip." "You'll regret this, Theodosia," she said, her voice cold. "Everyone in town will know how you threw your father's wife out on the street." "Everyone in town will know exactly what happened when they read the public court records," I countered, "including the evidence of financial exploitation and medication tampering." The line went dead as she hung up. True to form, Vivian Maxwell and Cassandra waited until the last possible day of the eviction period to move their belongings. I had arranged for a property inventory to be conducted by a neutral third party to prevent disputes about what belonged to whom. Items clearly purchased with Dad's money for household use remained. Personal items and possessions they had brought into the marriage went with them. I stood in the doorway as they loaded the last boxes into their vehicles, watching this chapter of our family history come to a close. There was no satisfaction in seeing them leave, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Maxwell paused beside me on his final trip out. "You know, she really did love him in her way," he said unexpectedly. "She just wasn't good at showing it once he got sick." "I believe that," I replied, surprised by this moment of honesty from him. "I wish things could have been different." He shrugged. "Yeah, well, she's always been a survivor. She'll land on her feet." And with that they were gone, leaving Dad and me alone in the house that held so many memories, both beautiful and painful. The months that followed were focused entirely on Dad's care. Without the constant tension created by Vivian's presence, his condition actually stabilized somewhat. The neurologist suggested that stress had been exacerbating his symptoms, a theory that seemed confirmed by his slight improvement. I hired professional caregivers to help during the day, allowing me to return to part-time paralegal work from home. The large house designed for a family felt eerily empty, with just the two of us and occasional nursing staff. After careful consideration and consultation with Dad on one of his clearer days, I made the decision to sell. "Too many ghosts here," Dad said, looking around the living room where so much family drama had unfolded. "Your mother would understand. We found a smaller single-level home, better suited to his mobility needs, with a bedroom and bathroom designed for someone with physical limitations. The sale of the family house provided enough funds to purchase the new place outright and establish a dedicated account for Dad's ongoing medical expenses." Slowly, I began reconnecting with my mother's side of the family, who had been gradually pushed away during Vivian's years. My Aunt Catherine, Mum's younger sister, had moved to Arizona years ago, but flew in to help us with the move. "Lisa would be so proud of you," she told me as we unpacked photos in the new house. "Standing up for yourself and for Richard like that. I wish it hadn't been necessary," I admitted. Carefully placing a photo of Mum on the mantel. "Family isn't always what we hope it will be," Catherine said wisely. "Sometimes it's who we choose, not just who we're related to." Her words resonated deeply. Over the following months, I created a new kind of family around Dad and me, his caregivers, who became friends, my colleagues, Amadins, who understood my need for flexible scheduling, Catherine, who called weekly and visited every few months, even neighbours in our new community who brought meals and offered help. Dad's condition continued its inevitable progression, but in an environment of genuine care and respect, his dignity remained intact. On good days, he would tell stories about Mum, memories I treasured. On difficult days when he couldn't recognise me or became agitated, I found strength in knowing I was honouring both my parents by ensuring he received the best possible care. A year after the court hearings, I received word that Vivian had remarried an elderly widower with significant assets. Maxwell had moved to another state for a job opportunity. Cassandra occasionally sent greeting cards to Dad, though never with a return address. I felt no bitterness toward them anymore. The legal battle had drained that emotion from me, leaving only a quiet determination to move forward and create something positive from the experience. On my 33rd birthday, instead of dreading the day as a reminder of last year's cruel eviction notice, I started a new tradition. I took the day off work, brought Dad to his favourite park, where we used to have picnics when I was a child, and spent the afternoon simply being together. That evening, I launched a small foundation using a portion of the proceeds from the house sale, a resource centre for families navigating elder care legal issues, offering guidance and sometimes financial assistance for those who couldn't afford proper representation. The Parker Family Care Advocacy Centre. I named it honouring both my parents' legacy. As I blew out the candles on my small birthday cake that night, Dad watched with a rare moment of complete clarity. "You found your way through it all," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Just like your mother always knew you would." I smiled, thinking of the journey from last year's birthday ambush to today's peaceful celebration. "Sometimes returning the favour isn't about revenge," I told him. "It's about reclaiming what was always rightfully yours, your dignity, your worth, your peace of mind." Dad nodded understanding despite his cognitive challenges. "Family," he said simply, reaching for my hand across the table. "Yes," I agreed, squeezing his fingers gently. "Real family." Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members to protect yourself or someone you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others know they're not alone in difficult family situations. Don't forget to subscribe if this story resonated with you, and hit that like button if you believe in creating healthy boundaries even with family. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what's rightfully theirs. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into.